It is not corruption. It is not. It's giving a bone to the media who want to go for us, but it's got nothing to do with propriety. It's got nothing to do with ethics.
If
and
there
it's
was
got nothing
nothing
to do
wrong,
with
then
corruption.
why did they say, okay, we won't take any more
Because
free
they're fed up
clothes?
with all these headlines.
None of this is terminal. It just feels as though it's got a little bit messy, and messy a lot quicker than I think some Labour politicians even thought it would.
If we accept for a moment your basic premise, which is that this is all nonsense and tittle-tattle,
This is all nonsense and tittle-tattle.
then isn't the bigger crime that you haven't, as a party, given us something more substantial to talk about? And that the first few weeks of Labour's government has all been about how bad everything is and not about what you're going to do about it. Hello and welcome to the Labour Party conference in Liverpool and to this special edition of the Political Forecast. And we'll be here every day of conference with the latest. This should have been Labour's big celebration after their landslide in July, but the summer is well and truly over, and so too is any hint of a honeymoon period, with the press at least, for Sir Keir Starmer. Hoist by their own words and promises about dodgy donations and jobs for cronies under the Tories, Labour is now on the back foot over similar stories of gifts and freebies and donors, and the rift inside the number 10 operation between the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, and lowlier staff in the Starmer operation and civil service is embarrassingly all over the newspapers. On top of that, the ground is being laid for a public spat with union bosses tomorrow over scrapping the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, and all the while the war intensifies in the Middle East, with many delegates here demanding a stronger position from this government on trying to bring about peace. So joining me to pick through all of this and set us up for the days ahead, we have Labour's Emily Thornberry, who has held several shadow cabinet roles over the years and has just become chair of the influential Foreign Affairs Select Committee of MPs, and Katy Balls is the political editor of The Spectator. Emily,
Hello.
it was, congratulations.
Thank you.
But it wasn't supposed to be like this, was it? I mean, this is not how this conference should be starting, surrounded by gossip and rumour and donors and scandal.
I don't know, I'm here to celebrate. I'm here to celebrate a Labour victory. I'm here to celebrate, after 15 years, a Labour government with a stonking great majority and a really big mandate from the people and a plan. And, you know, we've got a lot to do, but I'm really positive about it. You know, we've got more than half of Parliament are new people. There is an infusion of new blood and enthusiasm, and I think that we can make a real difference.
And that's what this conference should have been about.
This is what it's about.
But it's not.
It may not be in your head.
Well, no.
But that's because you're a bitter old so-and-so. But I mean, you know, I think that actually amongst all of these people here, we're really happy, you know, to have a Labour government and to have a chance to serve.
Yeah, but all of your colleagues in the cabinet have been talking about this all day. I mean, so they're not brushing it off and saying there's nothing to see here, let's just celebrate. They are admitting that there's been a mistake. They're changing their policy. They're not going to accept clothes anymore.
Okay. Let's address this. Let's address this head on. Okay. So should someone accept some clothes or money for clothes from a donor? So the question is this, right? Two things. First of all, is it open and transparent? And secondly, does that person who's giving that donation, are they going to get any perks themselves? Are they going to get any influence, any undue influence? And if the answer to that is it's transparent and there is no undue influence, then frankly, there's nothing to see. Apart from, I think, a lot of people think, well, why do rich people need help with buying clothes? Which is another issue, but it's not about corruption. And it's certainly not like what the Tories were up to over 14 years when they were in government. We are not talking about that, right? We are not. And I think it's really important to kind of draw the line behind that.
But you have to admit that this is sort of unforced error mess, isn't it? Like, it shouldn't have happened.
Okay.
You know,
once you accept from me, we're not talking about corruption. We're not talking about anything like what the Tories did. And what we're talking about is some missteps in the first few weeks of a government that's not been in for 15 years. Then fine. Then I'm prepared to talk about it in those terms.
It matters what people at home think.
Yes,
and
what
they're reading about.
And what we have to do. Exactly, and what they're reading about. And we have a Tory press which cannot forgive the Labour Party for winning an election. You know, they are out to get us. There's no doubt about it. I mean, read the Telegraph. My goodness, talk about hysterical, talk about shrill. I mean, blimey, look at the headlines.
Well,
it's just amazing.
Let's bring in Katy. I mean, what is going on? I mean, is this just the right-wing press out to get Starmer a bit quicker than we all expected? Or?
I mean, I don't think it's as simple as that. Obviously, I'm a journalist, so I've got my own views on this. But I think that it seems to me that, to Emily's point, it is not the biggest scandal of all time taking a Taylor Swift ticket to the Eras tour, or even the clothes. The slight complication on the clothes donation is one of the donors involved also did at one point have a Downing Street pass. Then
Wahid Ali.
Yeah, and then that obviously went. So some people say, is there a link there? But I think
Wahid has always been going in and out of Downing Street. I mean, during the last Labour government, Wahid was very close to the previous two prime ministers and was in and out of Downing Street. He didn't need to give anybody a pair of glasses for that. Well, they could have put him in the cabinet, but he's a businessman. He's got other things to do.
So in terms of links there, but I think generally speaking, it feels as though the Labour Cabinet's almost been tying itself in knots on something, and I think there was a way out sooner. And you have to admit that on the Saturday going into conference, if your main headline in all the papers is not change begins, which is clearly the message of this conference, and is instead Prime Minister and his top team will no longer accept free clothes, it's not what they are going for, and it's not ideal. And I do think that clearly the Labour government has a long time to go, and I think there's many years to go before the next election and so forth, so none of this is terminal. It just feels as though it's got a little bit messy, and messy a lot quicker than I think some Labour politicians even thought it would.
Yep.
And it just does mean, I think, and then you add some of the staffings, and you can say, the press are always more interested on personality politics and policy and so forth. But I think on the Sue Gray issue, who I understand is not coming to conference, you have a situation where there seem to be briefings coming from the inside that keep appearing regarding that person, which then points to, there's unrest somewhere else. And that takes the Labour Party to do some things to create the story.
Somebody taking photographs of Sue Gray in the Downing Street garden, which in itself is not that big a deal, but just shows you how much bad feeling there is in that number 10 operation at the moment.
Well, yeah, but let's. We're all old enough to remember the coalition government, aren't we? So when the coalition government came in, weren't there two characters at number 10 at that point? I can't even remember their names. I mean, there we are. At the time, we all knew who they were. One of them went off to California. The other one went to prison. What were their names?
Hilton.
That's it. Steve Hilton and the other one.
Andy Coulson.
Yeah. Remember, they were fighting like that at the beginning of the beginning of the coalition. I mean, all of that was going on. I mean, these things happen.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be better than this, is the point. And Sue Gray was a civil servant. She's not supposed to be a sort of a very political operator. She's supposed to be someone who knows. And the thing she's supposed to know about is propriety and ethics. And those are the things that seem to
There you are. You're going there again, you see. And what I've said to you is, that's not right. It's not about propriety and ethics, is it? Because we've been through. It is not corruption. It is not. It's giving a bone to the media who want to go for us. But it's got nothing to do with propriety. It's got nothing to do with ethics.
If there was nothing wrong, then why did they say, okay, we won't take any more free clothes?
Because they're fed up with all these headlines.
I think one of the things that we're seeing is just in opposition. Of course, Keir Starmer went very hard on propriety and ethics, but also just generally cleaning up politics.
Sure, and I would go hard too. Because when there's something is wrong and when something is dishonest, you go for it. But this has nothing to do with dishonesty.
I'm slightly reminded of, because Tony Blair, of course, always said his government would be whiter than white, and then his memoirs said it worked very well in opposition, but actually it proved to be a nightmare in government because suddenly people turned on. And I think that's why, just because Keir Starmer has been seen as Mr. Rules, it probably does mean that Labour are now being held up to a higher standard than perhaps.
So just on Sue Gray, now what is the story? What is supposed to be going on, and what is the dispute between her and other people? And who are those other people? Is it Morgan McSweeney, who was the guy from Labour Together who has sort of masterminded so much of Keir Starmer's success?
Yeah, I think initially and pre-Labour winning the election, there were often this talk of Morgan McSweeney versus Sue Gray, and then there was talks of, Sue Gray versus the boys, and some said that was unfair, but there was definitely a sense that when she came in a very senior role to number 10 as Chief of Staff, she ruffled some feathers. She has some big admirers in the cabinet, particularly those who felt a bit ignored by the previous advisors, but I think since Labour has entered government, it feels her critics are growing larger. And there's a general sense that her management style is too brisk for some. And then also I think there's an ongoing dispute about pay when it comes to new special advisors. And the very, very unhelpful story last week of someone inside the government machine telling the BBC that Sue Gray earns £3,000 more than Keir Starmer.
Now, why was that even a story, given the Cabinet Secretary earns even more than Sue Gray?
Because it's more than the previous chief of staffs have earned. And then I think actually the main story to me was the fact that someone had decided to leak it in a way that was hostile to her. At a time when all these junior spads are trying to get more money, and they see her as the blocker, though number 10 will say it's not really
And
her
again,
fault.
Keir Starmer said it's his job to sort that out. So he's not denying that there's a problem. He's saying, I'm going to get on top of it.
Yeah.
No?
I mean, I like the idea, actually, to be honest. I'll be honest with you. I like the idea of a guy in charge of an organisation who makes his female chief of staff get paid more than him. That's quite a good look. I quite like that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like, how many organisations are like that? How many men are like that?
If we accept for a moment your basic premise, which is that this is all nonsense and tittle-tattle.
This is all nonsense and tittle-tattle.
Then isn't the bigger crime that you haven't, as a party, given us something more substantial to talk about? And that is the bigger problem here, that there isn't a huge raft of announcements, there isn't a load of policy, and that the first few weeks of Labour's government has all been about how bad everything is and not about what you're going to do about it.
Renationalising the railways, getting rid of no-fault evictions. You know, both of those two things are very big deals. We have passed legislation to never allow a Liz Truss type figure to get hold of our economy and do whatever she wants with it. I mean, all of these things are pretty big. They're only in the first few weeks, you know, but we are doing huge amounts, it seems to me. We have essentially stopped the ban on onshore wind. I mean, you know, we're a party in a hurry. We're doing a great deal. Today, Angela Rayner has talked about, do you remember that boy who died because the flat that he lived in had so much mould and he had asthma and he died because of breathing difficulties? And we're going to pass legislation in order to make sure that decent home standards are properly include damp flats in a way that will mean that there's proper action. That's news from today. To me, that applies to more people's lives, that has more effect on people's lives than any tittle-tattle about how much money, you know, who gets who paid, who doesn't like who. This will always happen during the initial phases of a new government whilst people are positioning themselves and working out who has influence where and who does what, and how big their desk is and how many inches they are away from the Prime Minister and all this nonsense that you get. Of course you do, and you do. Doesn't matter which government's in power, doesn't matter who it is. That will always happen whilst people settle down. It's like, I think it's a well-used phrase, it's the cranking of the gears.
Yeah, no, that's the premise. I'm saying, okay, if we accept that,
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone does, but if we do, then the question is, are you giving us enough red meat? Katie, I mean...
Yeah, well, I think Labour is facing the issue, which is obviously when you're in government, every day you will have an annoying journalist say, what's the story, what's the thinking, where's the vision? But it is just actually a part of the current ecosystem we're in. And normally you do have to find a way to grapple with it. And I think there is just a sense of that shift from opposition to government is always quite uphill. But I think, you know, you speak to members of the cabinet, Labour MPs, privately, most will say that they do think it's not had the cleanest start. I think partly because they think it has been a bit too miserable, and they're hoping at this conference, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, who's speaking tomorrow, are going to be offer a ray of light. And the other thing you hear from being here...
So they do think they've slightly overdone the doom and gloom?
I think there is an acceptance of that when you speak to figures. And I think there's also an acceptance, like maybe not so much even with voters, but there is a concern that some of the doom and gloom is now starting to upset the business confidence, which Rachel Reeves wants for all the investment. So I think you're going to see an effort at this conference to not U-turn or go back on the narrative, but to slightly readjust almost the ratio of misery to sunshine to get that message across.
But the truth is that we've inherited a complete so-and-so show. I mean, it really is terrible what we've inherited. And every time my friends, you know, who are ministers, open a filing cabinet, there is at the back of the drawer a big file that says, do not open, too hard to deal with. And they open it and they go, this too? You know, and again we're dealing with, and we know that we had a Tory government that would not make any decisions for a very long time towards the end because they knew that they were going out of power, and why should they deal with anything difficult or even anything easy? They were just doing nothing, and they were quite happy to kind of spend as much money as they could in order to try to make things look good. But the reality is that, you know, we had public services on their knees.
But people do seem to accept the idea that there is a bit of a doom loop problem.
People seem to accept people
and that you need a little bit more hope.
So the people that I speak, people out in the country accept that it's a mess. they wanted a change, they've got a government that's coming in to make a change, and they accept that we need to be honest about how bad things are, but that we need to have a vision as to how it is we're going to make it better.
That's what we haven't really got yet.
But I don't think that we should be criticised for saying it as it is. Actually, people like it when they hear politicians
It's just the calibration, isn't it? That's what people are talking about. That obviously, your narrative for the next 4 years is what a mess the last lot made of it. But if you don't give people, well, it might well be the truth.
It's easy to say because it's the truth.
And there are things to point to there. I mean, clearly, Labour do have a really difficult inheritance, and Rachel Reeves is going to have to make some quite tricky decisions in a budget. But it is, I think, about, prudence with a purpose. I think we want to see what the purpose is and a bit more of where it's going.
So the unions here at this conference want a U-turn on the winter fuel allowance cut. Is that the sort of thing that anybody should be thinking about, do you think?
Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's not going to happen. We've got a £22 billion black hole in the budget, and difficult decisions need to be made, and that decision has been made. Some people would argue that it might have been easier if we'd rolled a pitch, if we had some sort of tapering and so on, and so that there wasn't such a cliff for people to fall off. I mean, I understand those arguments, but the point is the decision has been made, and there will be a budget that will need to also address the 22 billion. Difficult decisions need to be made in the future. So that's where we are, but we also need to be going for growth, and we need to have a plan as to where we're going and how we're going to get there, and that is what this conference is about.
Why has this measure become so important and totemic to people like Sharon Graham and other unions?
I think because it's clearly going to hurt a lot of pensioners who don't have very much money, and as Emily says, it's a blunt way of doing it. It's something that the Treasury tends to often suggest, but the reason some, including the Tories and others, have walked back from it before is because how do you stop those who aren't in line for the benefits but are still on the edge? And therefore I think for Labour politicians, they're going to be more relaxed about perhaps changing capital gains tax and some of those cuts that are more likely to affect higher earners, entrepreneurs and so forth than they are about those which, lots of them came into politics in the first place to help. But the issue now is that there was no pitch rolling, of course, and we now have a situation where I don't think Rachel Reeves could U-turn on it, even if she wanted to, and she doesn't, because she'd lose credibility, and it's one of her first steps as Chancellor. So you now have the Labour Party having to continue with quite an unpopular measure that I think is it worth the row it's going to have? But if you speak to those in the Treasury, they say, well, there are still plenty more difficult decisions to come.
I mean, the union line is, well, if you can change your position on donations, why can't you change your position on the winter fuel allowance? I mean, how does that argument run, do you think?
Well, I think it's an unhelpful argument to the Labour government. I mean, I think Sharon Graham of Unite is almost pitching herself as a leader on the left who can provide the opposition on the left to Keir Starmer in some of those ways. I don't think it is going to, change what the Labour government is planning to do. But I think, U-turning in terms of free clothes, I'm not sure the U-turn on Friday was particularly helpful, because I think now Keir Starmer is going to be asked not only who are you wearing today, but why don't you return the suit you were wearing? Because if it was wrong to take any more in the future, why don't you return what you have? But I think, in a way, that U-turn is pretty trivial compared to U-turning on a major fiscal decision.
Just on the triviality, if that's what it is, to come back to what Emily was saying at the beginning about the hostile right-wing press, is it, has it turned, it was never on his side, but do you think the press is now going to go for Labour pretty full throttle from now?
I think the press are quite critical.
Spectator.
Also write for The Guardian, Emily,
right, okay.
and The Eye. We can list them off. The Times, not sure whether that one counts. The New York Times occasionally. But no, I mean, I think the press is, Labour did get some key endorsements, during the general election from Sunday Times, for example. It did not get endorsements from the Daily Mail. I don't think anyone was shocked. I mean, the Daily Mail did really go for Boris Johnson and Wallpapergate. It was actually the paper that revealed a lot of those allegations at the time. So I don't think it's quite as simple as, everything is being done for a political slant. But it's always been the case, I think, that Labour gets a lot of scrutiny from certain outlets. And I think the fact that Keir Starmer's popularity ratings have fallen quite a bit too since the election probably means that people are going to keep going. I think the honeymoon is over.
Let's just talk about another issue which you're closely involved in now, on the Select Committee, which is the Middle East.
Yeah.
This week, we could see a big escalation in the war between Israel and Lebanon. That has its own risks of drawing in wider regional conflict again, and the possibility of conflict with Iran.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of people at this conference who are a bit mystified as to why a Labour government isn't taking a harder line on things like blowing up children with pagers and walkie-talkies. Is this government too much like the last government on Israel?
This government, I'm not the Foreign Secretary, right? I speak as the chair-elect of the...
You've got to hold them to account.
Yeah. So, but what the government has said is quite clearly and unequivocally that there has to be a ceasefire in Gaza, and there has to be a return of the hostages. And 65% of the Israeli public think that that's what the Israeli government should be doing, and that should be their priority. And instead of doing that, Netanyahu has sent 2 divisions to the northern border of Israel and is threatening to move into southern Lebanon. That is not what, in my view, the Israeli people want. It's not what the international community wants. It's not what the Labour government wants. The Labour government wants a ceasefire and wants the release of hostages.
But when thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies went off, and it was almost certainly Israel, and the UN Human Rights Chief and eminent international lawyers, many of whom I'm sure you know, said this is illegal, this breaks international humanitarian law, would you expect a Labour government led by a lawyer to say the same thing?
No, because what we do is, wherever there is a war, it's not right for us in London to be sitting there going, well, from what we can see, there's been a breach of international law that is illegal. What we say is we need to make sure that there is the evidence, and people need to be held to account if there are breaches of international law. The courts decide, not politicians. So that's the discipline, and that's what I know Keir has tried to stick to throughout, and this applies. We have made it clear, haven't we, as Britain, that we've made it clear that what we want is we want there to be a negotiated settlement, and the Foreign Secretary went out straight away, didn't he, and said, we must stop. This must stop on the border between Israel and Lebanon. There needs to be a negotiation. This must stop now. And it's not being listened to. But I don't think you can say that the British government hasn't been clear about what it is that it wants.
So if people stop you and say we're not doing enough, which I bet they will,
yeah, I'm sure
over the
will.
next couple of days, is that what you'll say?
I'll say, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? We've brought back the funding to UNRWA, which is the organisation that looks after Palestinians, right? We have looked again at the law, the legal advice on whether or not we should be selling particular arms to Israel, arms that could be used for external aggression or for internal repression. And 30 of those, we've stopped those licenses going forward. The same advice, actually, that the Conservative government had, but they seem to think was perfectly fine. So that sort of thing has happened, and the government has been clear that they want there to be a ceasefire, and there needs to be a negotiated settlement, and we need to get the release of the hostages. So what else do you want? What do you want more than that?
Finally, just from both of you, what are you looking ahead to? What's the thing you've got to keep your eye out for at conference, Casey?
Well, I think Rachel Reeves' speech tomorrow will be interesting because we're talking about the winter fuel, potentially a vote, but we're waiting for that to be confirmed. But in terms of this miserablism narrative, and in terms of the budget, which could have a lot more rows if you think about the discontent already, how does she pitch it?
And are they going to change it?
Exactly,
slightly?
and can she give her party some better news? I think they might sneak in some actually good news announcements to try to set the narrative that way, because so much is being driven right now by the Treasury.
I'm looking forward to Keir's speech. I think that I'm looking forward to him coming to the stage as the Labour Prime Minister and saying what it is that he wants to do and how he wants to lead our country and all the improvements that we can make.
Are you going to be in the queue to be one of the 100 allowed in?
I'm in the queue.
Yes.
And I also want to, I'm also looking forward to my DJ set.
Oh, tell us about that.
Oh, I'm DJing Labour students, as I always do.
Right.
A lot of 80s music, which I know very well, but they seem to know really well too, and some more modern stuff that my staff have told me about.
Okay. I look forward to that. Emily Thornberry, Katie Balls, thank you very much indeed. That is today's political forecast. More from here at Labour tomorrow. For now, bye-bye.